to be in the mid-80s. We'll finally start to see spring settle back in, guys, as we get into Saturday and Sunday. The 60s will return to New York. Still 80s, though, in Washington, D.C. on Sunday. Love to see that. Thank you.
Now to new developments in the legal battle over the abortion drug, mifepristone. The federal appeals court issued a decision late last night clearing the way for the pill to remain available in the U.S. for now. But there are now certain restrictions. Civil rights attorney and former prosecutor Kristen Gibbons-Fendon joined us now to dig into this. Kristen, it's good to see you. So first off, what should we know about the new limitations on exactly how this drug can be dispensed?
Yeah, so as you said, the stay was lifted on every single thing that was argued except the FDA's 2000 approval. So like you mentioned, it will remain on the market. But this is that starting today, there's going to be significant rollback as to the access to this drug. So yesterday, women were able to obtain the abortion pill via mail up to 70 days after pregnancy and didn't require an in-office visit with a physician. But as of this morning, women will only have 50 days and will be required to have 3 in-person visits with a qualified physician before being able to take the drug. And when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, a woman is likely to realize that she's pregnant, taking us past 30 days is when you have a missed menstrual cycle. So that means that a woman will really only have 20 days or less to squeeze in 3 in-person office visits and only be able to obtain the pill without mail usage. So while it's great that the pill will remain on the market, these significant limitations will significantly roll back access to it.
And Kristen, of course, there's been so much legal back and forth. What is the Justice Department's argument here in its request for the emergency stay?
Well, they're making a number of arguments. They're basically saying that they followed their own regulations and standards when they approved the abortion pill in 2000, that they adequately monitored and enforced the restrictions on the pill's distribution and use, which were updated in 2016, and then also that they had the discretion to modify or suspend the restrictions due to various health emergencies such as COVID-19, which paved the way for the mail-in as well as changing the amount of time that the in-person visits would need to take place. But I think most importantly, and this is what the Fifth Circuit really allowed to lift the stage in part, was that the plaintiffs, which again were a coalition of anti-abortion groups and doctors, they lacked standing to bring this suit, not only for various reasons because they were not directly harmed, but also because there was a statute of limitations argument, which was compelling to the Fifth Circuit.
So much to watch here. All eyes on these cases. Kristen Gibbons-Fendon, thank you so much.
Turning now to Richmond, Indiana. That area still dealing with the aftermath of a toxic fire burning at a former recycling plant. Thousands of homes have been evacuated now, and schools remain closed for a second day. This as the Environmental Protection Agency continues collecting samples to test any toxins that may be present in the air. They're also trying to figure out if there's asbestos in debris left behind. Richmond's Mayor Dave Snow says the recycling plant's owner, My Way Trading, ignored a previous order to clean up that property. An order, he says, was issued due to potential fire hazards. My Way Trading has not yet commented publicly about this fire.
And we're learning more this morning about what happened in the terrifying moments leading up to that deadly bank shooting in Louisville and during. Police have released the 911 calls from that morning, and those chilling calls include pleas from the employees as well as a call from the shooter's mother. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky is in Louisville and joins us now with the very latest. Good morning, Morgan. I know you have been on this beat for quite some time. You've actually had a chance to hear some of the 911 calls. What do we know about them?
Yeah, Clay, it's interesting. Every new piece of evidence that has come out since the shooting has taken place has painted a more frightening portrait. We saw the police body cam released yesterday that really showed the chaos here outside the bank as they responded. But these new 911 calls are so tough to hear because they paint a chilling portrait as to what's taking place on the inside. Caller after caller detailing what they witnessed as you hear gunshots play out in the background. We're going to hear a portion of one of these calls. A woman inside the bank.
3 of his 3 oldest children, as well as the Trump Organization. This comes after a 3-year investigation of the Trump Organization from 2011 to 2021. And it alleges that he routinely and habitually made false statements about the value of his properties, anything from hotels, skyrises, and golf forces in order to receive more favorable bank loans. According to the papers filed by Letitia James, if he is found guilty of this, she is seeking $250 million in damages, as well as something like a 5-year ban on Trump being able to do any kind of real estate deals in the state of New York. Stevie?
So what is Trump, or what's his legal team saying about this lawsuit? And also, is he expected to actually testify here, or could he plead the fifth like he did in the previous deposition back in August?
He absolutely could. It's his legal right to take the fifth if he chooses to. He's not yet arrived here at the Attorney General's office. What he's saying about this moment is that he did nothing wrong. We don't know if he's going to take the fifth, but what we do know is that he's been sending out a lot of social media posts about this overnight, as well as this morning, saying something to the effect of calling Letitia James a racist. He says that this and other legal battles that he's facing, he calls them election interference. And he also says he finally will get an opportunity to show what a great, profitable, and valuable company that he's built, one of the greatest assets of anywhere in the world. So talking a lot on social media, will he take the fifth here today and be virtually silent like he did in August, where he took the fifth something like 400 times?
Expecting, if you look at the bank fund managers, the next systemic credit event will happen. It's high up on the list of real risks that fund managers are looking at. I think we have gotten a bit maybe too complacent about a couple of things. The first is, it's true that the real estate market has had quite some excesses over the last 10 years, but not only the US one has had. I mean, look at Europe as well, look at places like Sweden or the UK. In the UK, we are looking at millions of mortgages to be refinanced at rates which are much, much higher than the ones that were there 5 years ago. And there are some countries as well, Canada, that have a much higher household debt and a much higher embedded leverage than the US has. This goes to show that if the real estate is the sector that might have a problem, it's not necessarily the US, which is going to see the credit event first, but there are many other cases where in the last 10 years, zero interest rates or negative interest rates, truly low volume and so on and so forth have generated quite some excessive speculative behavior. And it's not only about the US. I mean, people need to have a global macro approach. Never like now. I think having a look at what happens around the world and not only in the US is paramount important for portfolio allocations.
Gentlemen, thank you both this morning for joining us and for some great analysis and insights and perhaps a little bit of a vision into what we should be keeping a close eye on going forward. And Miller Tabak, Managing Director and Equity Strategist Matt Daly, and the Macro Compass Founder and CEO Alfonso Pecatello. Thank you so much.
Today's interview is brought to you by Van Eck, a global leader in asset management since 1955. You'll be hearing more about Van Eck's income-focused ETFs later on, but for now, let's get into today's interview. Very excited to welcome to Forward Guidance Liz Ann Saunders, Chief Investment Strategist at Charles Schwab. Liz Ann, wonderful to get you on Forward Guidance. I've been meaning to get you for a while, and I'm very excited you're finally here.
Thanks, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. Liz Ann, walk us through how you're thinking about things at the moment. The most popular phrase of 2022 probably was, the Fed will hike until it breaks things. Was the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank just under a month ago, in your mind, did that constitute breaking something?
Yes, I think so. And it may not be the thing that broke, but a thing that broke. And that's just the natural aftermath of not just a garden variety Fed hiking cycle. It's that phrase that the Fed hikes until something breaks. That's been around a long time. And that's typically what ends a hiking cycle, is something breaking, some sort of crisis. But particularly in this environment where the hiking cycle has been the most aggressive in more than 40 years. But the reason why I say it wasn't is that I think the failure of Silicon Valley Bank obviously has led to a lot of concerns about the banking system more broadly, and I don't think this is a 2008 kind of situation, but I think it's emblematic of the end of the era of easy money and coming off that zero bound, shrinking the balance sheet, and this being a global phenomenon, not just a U.S. phenomenon, to use
Warren Buffett's quote, we all love to do that, is when the liquidity tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. So to borrow somebody else's phrase, I think SVB was a naked swimmer, but I think there's probably more. And that doesn't just mean within the banking system. It's just there were a lot of companies, startups, zombies that were kept afloat or allowed to grow and flourish in this high liquidity, zero interest rate environment. And those days are over. I think the implications are still somewhat in front of us, not behind us.
There are three implications I want to explore of the turmoil in the banking sector. Number one is on the real economy, and the channel through that is bank lending. Are banks going to be more cautious on lending? The second is the Federal Reserve response function, and the third is on the stock market, where it's actually on quite a tear. Let's focus on the middle one, the Fed's response function, because you talked about the era of easy money is over. It definitely was ending rapidly in 2022 as interest rates were going up, the Fed's balance sheet, quantitative tightening was going down. However, and the market has been anticipating maybe, the Fed is going to be a little bit lighter. Maybe the Fed will cut more. We have this new bank term funding program. So is the ongoing bank issues, will that make easy money maybe a little bit more if the Fed thinks it's necessary to restore liquidity?
There's a lot of cross currents right now, and arguably what the Fed is suggesting via its summary of economic projections, the dots plot, is something a bit different than what the bond market is suggesting, which in turn isn't quite what the equity market is suggesting with his actions. So something's got to give. I grew up in this business starting in the mid-'80s, working for the late great Marty Zweig, who coined the phrase "Don't fight the Fed." So I get asked the question a lot: is the stock market fighting the Fed? I'm not so sure the stock market's fighting the Fed, but the stock market is fighting the bond market, which in turn is fighting the Fed. And the bond market having priced in not just a pause, but a pivot to rate cuts, that's a possibility, there's no question about that, but not without either significant economic deterioration from here or a meaningful spreading of the problems in the banking system. What I think maybe the narrative embedded in what the stock market has done is probably not a likely narrative, which is the Fed pauses and then they pivot to rate cuts, but it won't be because of a serious deterioration in the economy or more significant weakness in the labor market or a more contagion in the banking system. That to me is what may be disconnected here. I think a pause and then staying there for a while, that in essence is what the Fed is suggesting is their likely path. Whether that was the last rate hike, the most recent meeting, or whether they have maybe one more in their pocket, I think it's the time frame associated with the pause where there still is a disconnect. And at this point, I think you should probably not take the Fed at its words. They're data dependent, so they don't have a playbook that they're playing off of, and they're just deciding when to share it in more detail with us, lowly market and Fed watchers. I think the data will decide for them what to do with rates, but I think if the banking system sort of stays fairly calm as it has in the last week or two, courtesy of in large part the funding facilities and banks that have come to the discount window, if we don't see a reignition of the banking crisis and the economy sort of hangs in there, if you don't get a serious hit to the jobs market or you don't see a much bigger drop in inflation than what's expected, then the pause, I think, is going to be with us for a while. And I'm not sure if the stock market has digested the difference between a pause and a pivot.
Right. And how are you thinking about the general economy? I know many in the market have been anticipating a recession that the U.S. would enter quite quickly, but the economic data in January and February was surprisingly strong. How have you made sense of that? I know we're recording the afternoon of April 4th. A lot of data came out today and yesterday, last week, about the ISM, prices paid, the JOLTS number. What is your take on the most recent economic data?
We've been saying we've been in a version of a rolling recession for a while now, where the weakness rolls through different segments of the economy.
Isn't there a mandate by focusing on the labor market, which is, as you said, a lagging indicator? Shouldn't we be looking at what the Fed looks at?
So the Fed has a dual mandate, which is price stability, aka inflation, and full employment, aka the labor market. But they're not just looking at like one particular metric of each and going off of some level, and when it hits this level, then they move one direction or another. They know that inflation is inherently a lagging indicator. They get it, they talk about it. That said, when you get to a 40-year high and they admit to being behind the curve, probably having launched off the zero bound.
Around 1933, 40 to 50% of the home mortgages were in default. And, back then,